Learn English through stories E20. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents 1. Tiger, My Friend, Part 1. 2. The Woman and the Farmer. 3. Grammar page. 1. Tiger, My Friend, Part 1. By Ruskin Bond. 1. On the left bank of the river Ganges, where it flows out from the Himalayan foothills, is a long stretch of heavy forest. There are villages on the fringe of the forest, inhabited by farmers and herdsmen. Big game hunters came to the area for many years, and as a result, the animals had been getting fewer. The trees, too, had been disappearing slowly. And as the animals lost their food and shelter, they moved further into the foothills. There was a time when this forest had provided a home for some 30 to 40 tigers, but men in search of skins and trophies had shot them all, and now there remained only one old tiger in the jungle. The hunters had tried to get him too, but he was a wise and crafty tiger who knew the ways of man, and so far he had survived all attempts on his life. Although the tiger had passed the prime of his life, he had lost none of his majesty. His muscles rippled beneath the golden yellow of his coat, and he walked through the long grass with the confidence of one who knew that he was still a king, although his subjects were fewer. His great head pushed through the foliage, and it was only his tail, swinging high, that sometimes showed above the sea of grass. He was heading for water, the water of a large marsh, where he sometimes went to drink or cool off. The marsh was usually deserted, except when the buffaloes from a nearby village were brought there to bathe or wallow in the muddy water. The tiger waited in the shelter of a rock, his ears pricked for any unfamiliar sound. He knew that it was here that hunters sometimes waited for him with guns. He walked into the water, amongst the water lilies, and drank slowly. He was seldom in a hurry when he ate or drank. He raised his head and listened, one paw suspended in the air. A strange sound had come to him on the breeze, and he was wary of strange sounds. So he moved swiftly into the shelter of the tall grass that bordered the marsh, and climbed a hillock until he reached his favorite rock. This rock was big enough to hide him and to give him shade. The sound he had heard was only a flute, sounding thin and reedy in the forest. It belonged to Nandu, a slim brown boy who rode a buffalo. Nandu played vigorously on the flute. Chatu, a slightly smaller boy, riding another buffalo, brought up the rear of the herd. There were 8 buffaloes in the herd, which belonged to the families of Nandu and Chatu, who were cousins. Their fathers sold buffalo milk and butter in villages further down the river. The tiger had often seen them at the marsh, and he was not bothered by their presence. He knew the village folk would leave him alone as long as he did not attack their buffaloes. And as long as there were deer in the jungle, he would not be interested in other prey. He decided to move on and find a cool, shady place in the heart of the jungle where he could rest during the hot afternoon and be free of the flies and mosquitoes that swarmed around the marsh. At night, he would hunt. With a lazy grunt that was half a roar, he got off his haunches and sauntered off into the jungle. The gentlest of tigers' roars can be heard a mile away, and the boys, who were barely 50 yards distant, looked up immediately. "There he goes," said Nandu, taking the flute from his lips and pointing with it towards the hillock. "Did you see him?" "I saw his tail just before he disappeared. He's a big tiger." "Don't call him tiger, call him uncle." "Why?" asked Chatu. "Because it's unlucky to call a tiger. My father told me so, but if you meet a tiger and call him uncle, he will leave you alone." "I see," said Chatu. "You have to make him a relative. I'll try and remember that." The buffaloes were now well into the march, and some of them were lying down in the mud. Buffaloes love soft, wet mud, and will wallow in it for hours. Nandu and Chatu were not so fond of the mud, so they went swimming in deeper water. Later, they rested in the shade of an old silk cotton tree. It was evening, and the twilight fading fast, when the buffalo herd finally made its way homeward, to be greeted outside the village by the barking of dogs, the gurgle of hookah pipes, and the homely smell of cow dung smoke. 2. The following evening, when Nandu and Chatu came home with the buffalo herd, they found a crowd of curious villagers surrounding a jeep in which sat 3 strangers with guns. They were hunters, and they were accompanied by servants and a large store of provisions. They had heard that there was a tiger in the area, and they wanted to shoot it. These men had money to spend. And as most of the villagers were poor, they were prepared to go into the forest to make a machan or tree platform for the hunters. The platform, big enough to take the 3 men, was put up in the branches of a tall mahogany tree. Nandu was told by his father to tie a goat at the foot of the tree. While these preparations were being made, Chatu slipped off and circled the area, with a plan of his own in mind. He had no wish to see the tiger killed, and he had decided to give it some sort of warning. So he tied up bits and pieces of old clothing on small trees and bushes. He knew the wily old king of the jungle would keep well away from the area if he saw the bits of clothing, for where there were men's clothes, there would be men. The vigil kept by the hunters lasted all through the night, but the tiger did not come near the tree. Perhaps he got Chatu's warning. Or perhaps he wasn't hungry. It was a cold night, and it wasn't long before the hunters opened their flasks of rum. Soon they were whispering among themselves. And they were chattering so loudly that no wild animal would have come anywhere near them. By morning they were fast asleep. They looked grumpy and shamefaced as they trudged back to the village. "Wrong time of the year for tiger," said the first hunter. "Nothing left in these parts," said the second. "I think I've caught a cold," said the third. And they drove away in disgust. It was not until the beginning of the summer that something happened to alter the hunting habits of the tiger and bring him into conflict with the villagers. There had been no rain for almost 2 months, and the tall jungle grass had become a sea of billowy dry yellow. Some city dwellers, camping near the forest, had been careless while cooking and had started a forest fire. Slowly it spread into the interior, from where the acrid fumes smoked the tiger out towards the edge of the jungle. As night came on, the flames grew more vivid, the smell stronger. The tiger turned and made for the marsh, where he knew he would be safe provided he swam across to the little island in the center. Next morning he was on the island, which was untouched by the fire. But his surroundings had changed. The slopes of the hills were black with burnt grass, and most of the tall bamboo had disappeared. The deer and the wild pig, finding that their natural cover had gone, moved further east. When the fire had died down and the smoke had cleared, the tiger prowled through the forest again, but found no game. He drank at the marsh and settled down in a shady spot to sleep the day away. The tiger spent 4 days looking for game. By that time he was so hungry that he even resorted to rooting among the dead leaves and burnt-out stumps of trees, searching for worms and beetles. This was a sad come-down for the king of the jungle, but even now he hesitated to leave the area in search of new hunting grounds, for he had a deep fear and suspicion of the unknown forests, further east, forests that were fast being swept away by human habitation. He could have gone north into the high mountains, but they did not provide him with the long grass he needed for cover. At break of day he came to the marsh. The water was now shallow and muddy, and a green scum had spread over the top. He drank, and then lay down across his favorite rock, hoping for a deer. But none came. He was about to get up and lope away when he heard an animal approach. The tiger at once slipped off his rock and flattened himself on the ground, his tawny stripes merging with the dry grass. A buffalo emerged from the jungle and came to the water. The buffalo was alone. He was a big male, and his long curved horns lay right back across his shoulders. He moved leisurely towards the water, completely unaware of the tiger's presence. The tiger hesitated before making his charge. It was a long time, many years, since he had killed a buffalo, and he knew instinctively that the villagers would be angry. But the pangs of hunger overcame his caution. There was no morning breeze, everything was still, and the smell of the tiger did not reach the buffalo. A monkey chattered on a nearby tree, but his warning went unheeded. Crawling stealthily on his stomach, the tiger skirted the edge of the marsh and approached the buffalo from behind. The buffalo was standing in shallow water, drinking, when the tiger charged from the side and sank his teeth into his victim's thigh. The buffalo staggered, but turned to fight. He snorted and lowered his horns at the tiger. But the big cat was too fast for the brave buffalo. He bit into the other leg, and the buffalo crashed to the ground. Then the tiger moved in for the kill. After resting, he began to eat. Although he had been starving for days, he could not finish the huge carcass. And so he quenched his thirst at the marsh and dragged the remains of the buffalo into the bushes to conceal it from jackals and vultures. Then he went off to find a place to sleep. He would return to the kill when he was hungry. 2. The woman and the farmer. Nora and Sohail lived in a small village. They made their living by making, baking, and selling clay pitchers. One day, Sohail died of tuberculosis TB. His body was buried in the village graveyard. His wife Nora used to go every day to his grave and lament her loss. In the same village lived Banta. He married Sani when he was 20. Santi was a stern lady. Banta was always scared of her. 2 years later, Sani died of cholera. One day, as usual, Nora was bewailing at her husband's grave. Banta, who was engaged in plowing not far from the spot, set eyes upon Nora. He desired to have her for his wife. So he left his plow and came and sat by her side and began to shed tears himself. She asked him why he wept, and he replied, "I have lately lost my wife, who is very dear to me, and tears ease my grief. And I," said she, "have lost my husband." And so for a while they mourned in silence. Then he said, "Since you and I are in like case, shall we not do well to marry and live together? I shall take the place of your dead husband, and you that of my dead wife." Nora consented to the plan, which indeed seemed reasonable enough, and they dried their tears. Nora thought a Punjabi song. "Take my spinning wheel there, where you are plowing you fields." Meanwhile, a thief had come and stolen the oxen which Banta had left with his plow. On discovering the theft, he beat his breast and loudly bewailed his loss. When Nora heard his cries, she came and said, "Why are you weeping still?" To which he replied, "Yes, and I mean it this time." Nora laughed and thought to herself, "Crocodile tears, they pretend to be sad, but they are not sad at all." 3. Grammar page. Verbs and tenses continue.